In the 24th century, the timeline shattered, and Starfleet called it restoration. In the Next Generation episode, Yesterday's Enterprise, the crew of the Enterprise D encounters a spatial rift, a glowing tear in the galaxy's skin. From it emerges a ship lost to time, the USS Enterprise C, last seen in 2344 during a desperate stand at Naranja 3. But this isn't a mere accident of physics. The moment the Enterprise C appears in the future, reality changes. The lighting shifts, uniforms change, the bridge darkens. Starfleet, once a vessel of peaceful exploration, is now a hardened military force in the middle of a long and bloody war with the Klingon Empire. Tactical officers replace scientists. Casualties are reported without ceremony. And most notably, Tasha Yar is alive. This is not just a time travel episode. It is a rare moment where Star Trek fully commits to the terror of a broken timeline. There is no time travel adventure, no external villain to confront. The villain is history itself. Rewritten, brutal, and wrong. The only person who seems to feel that wrongness is Guinan. She doesn't know the cause. She can't explain it in technical terms. But she knows that Tasha Yar isn't supposed to be alive. She knows that this isn't how the Federation is meant to be. Her unease is more than intuition. It's temporal memory. A kind of metaphysical ache that something precious has been lost. And that gives the episode its moral center. Picard, a hardened version of the man we know, listens. When the truth surfaces that the Enterprise C was pulled into the future during its final battle, the solution becomes clear. Send it back. Let it complete its mission. Let it die. It's not an easy decision. In this timeline, the Enterprise C's destruction is the only thing that can restore peace. Its sacrifice at Naranja 3 is remembered in the original history as a turning point in Federation-Klingon relations. Without it, the conflict never ends. Picard orders the ship to return. He even sends crew to assist it. The battle escalates. Klingon ships hammer the Enterprise D. The lights flicker. Phasers erupt. As the Enterprise C slips back through the rift, time reasserts itself. The war timeline vanishes. Peace returns. The original crew is back on the bridge, unaware of what they just avoided. But here's the problem. Tasha Yar didn't vanish. In the alternate timeline, she chooses to go with the Enterprise C, seeking purpose, redemption, or maybe just a meaningful death. She's captured by the Romulans, and eventually, she gives birth to a daughter, Sela. This is the paradox at the heart of Star Trek's most consequential time travel story. If the timeline was truly restored, if the past was put back in place, then how does Sela still exist? The episode ends quietly. The crew cruises through space. Guinan, the only one with any sense that something has changed, sits with Geordi and 10 forward. She asks about Tasha Yar, a woman who, to everyone else, died long ago. Guinan doesn't remember the details, but she knows the official version of history doesn't feel right. There's no big twist, no dramatic sting, just a subtle suggestion that the price of fixing time may have been higher than anyone realizes. And a truth left unsaid, that the damage wasn't undone. Because Sela is real. She's not from the past. She's not from the future. She is a fixed point from a timeline that should not exist. And yet, she walks through the corridors of the restored Federation like she belongs there. Her presence is a scar, a fracture, a contradiction. One that forces us to ask a dangerous question. If someone from an erased history can still exist, did the Prime Timeline ever truly come back? Or was it rewritten, forever changed, and simply told us that it was Prime? Because no one left remembered the difference. Hey guys, quick break before we continue. I just want to say thank you. To put out a video, it takes at least a week of writing, editing, and research, sometimes more. But thanks to support from YouTube members and patrons and viewers like you, I'm halfway to getting back to doing this full time. That means more content, more Star Trek breakdowns, and more time spent digging into stories like this. If you're already supporting, you're part of that. If you're just watching, you're part of that too. And if you want to help push this channel over the line, even a few dollars a month makes a real difference. If 2 out of 10 people who watched my video gave just $2 each, I'd be already there. So if you want more videos like this, please consider becoming a lore master. You can join now on Patreon or right here on YouTube by becoming a member. Now let's get back to the fracture in the timeline. She shouldn't exist. Not because she's a Romulan, not because she's half human, but because her mother only lived long enough to conceive her in a timeline that was never meant to happen. Sela's very existence in the Prime Timeline is a contradiction. After yesterday's Enterprise, Star Trek never directly revisits the mechanics of what happened to Tasha Yar. In the restored timeline, Yar is dead, killed by the entity known as Armus on Vagra 2, as shown in Skin of Evil. But because of Guinan's intervention, Yar chooses to return to the past with Enterprise C. She disappears from history at Naranja 3, believed to have died in a historic last stand. But she didn't die. She was captured. The Romulans took her as a prisoner of war. At some point during her captivity, she became the consort of a Romulan general. Whether it was voluntary or coerced is never clearly stated, a discomforting ambiguity the show never fully explores. What matters for the timeline, though, is this. She gave birth to a daughter. That daughter grew up in the Romulan Empire, raised with suspicion and bitterness, taught to hate the Federation, but bearing the unmistakable face of her human mother. That daughter became Commander Sela, a high-ranking Romulan operative who would go on to manipulate the Klingon Civil War, attempt an invasion of Vulcan, and alter the course of the Alpha Quadrant history. All of that from a timeline that should have vanished. And yet, no one questions it. When Sela first appears in Redemption, she claims her identity without fanfare. Data and the crew are understandably shocked by her resemblance to Yar, but the mechanics of how she exists are left vague. It isn't until unification that we receive a full explanation, and even then, it raises more questions than answers. Because if the timeline was restored by the Enterprise C's return, if everything snapped back to how it was supposed to be, then that version of Tasha Yar, the one who lived long enough to give birth, should no longer exist. In temporal logic, this is called a closed-loop paradox, where a future event causes a past event to happen, which in turn causes the future event. But in Sela's case, the loop isn't closed. The altered timeline was collapsed. The restored timeline should have overwritten her entirely. But it didn't. This means one of two things happened, and neither supports the idea that the Prime Timeline was truly restored. The first option is that the timeline wasn't restored. The version of history we follow after yesterday's Enterprise is subtly different. Close enough to feel familiar, but altered in key ways. Sela is the evidence. Her presence is a sign that this Prime timeline is not a return to the original, but a merged branch that absorbed elements of both realities. The second option is that time is not self-correcting. It's accumulative. In this model, Star Trek's timeline behaves more like a river with debris. It flows forward, but disruptions leave behind traces. The ripples from the Enterprise C's arrival didn't vanish when the ship returned. They echoed forward, leaving fragments behind. Sela is one of those fragments. And that may be the more terrifying possibility, because it means that every time travel event in Star Trek, no matter how neatly resolved, leaves behind consequences. It means history is fragile, and it never really heals. This interpretation is supported by later series like Star Trek Picard and Voyager, where time travel often creates unstable echoes. But Sela is unique, because she isn't a memory. She isn't a vision. She isn't a temporal anomaly. She's real. She's permanent. She commands ships. She manipulates galactic powers. She exists. And her mother, the Tasha Yar who gave her life, only existed in a timeline that should no longer be here. Which brings us to the next question. If Sela lived, what else changed? Sela didn't just survive the collapse of an alternate timeline. She shaped the future that followed. If the post-Yesterday's Enterprise timeline is supposed to be a restoration of the Prime continuity, then the ripple effects caused by Sela raise a difficult question. How much of that future still belonged to the original? Because without Sela, some of the most consequential political and military events in Star Trek The Next Generation likely wouldn't have unfolded the way they did, if at all. In the two-part episode Redemption, the Klingon Empire is on the brink of collapse. Gowron's ascension is challenged by the Duras family, whose claim to the Chancellorship is bolstered by secret Romulan support. And behind it all, orchestrating the operation, is Sela. She becomes the face of the Romulan agenda. Bold, strategic, and deeply personal. Her knowledge of Federation tactics, her understanding of human psychology, and her obsession with legacy all play into the manipulation of events. Without Sela, the Romulan campaign might never have taken such a high-risk, high-profile approach. A different operative, perhaps more traditional, less emotionally driven, may not have pursued the Klingon destabilization with such boldness. And that matters, because the war nearly turns the Klingon Empire into a Romulan client state. Only with Federation intervention does Gowron retain control. Had Sela succeeded, the political map of the Alpha and Beta quadrants would have changed drastically, long before the Dominion War ever began. Later in Unification, Sela attempts one of the most daring operations in Romulan history, an invasion of Vulcan, disguised as a reunification mission. The plan is audacious. Romulan ships will ultimately attempt to land troops on Vulcan and establish a foothold before the Federation can respond. Sela uses Spock's unification initiative and the idealism of Romulan dissidents as a smokescreen for conquest. Again, this is more than standard Romulan espionage. It's personal. Sela confronts Picard directly, mocking his principles. Her vendetta is not just against the Federation, it's against the legacy of Tasha Yar, the mother she believes chose duty over family. This isn't just politics, it's psychology, and it nearly works. Had the plan succeeded, the Romulans would have gained a permanent presence on Vulcan itself, destabilizing the heart of the Federation and striking a blow that no other villain in TNG ever came close to. And it doesn't stop there. Before Sela's introduction, the Romulans were shadowy, secretive, always looming, rarely acting. After her arrival, they became bold, aggressive, willing to challenge the Federation head-on. This tonal shift can't be overlooked. The Romulan role in TNG changes with Sela's emergence. She becomes the first recurring Romulan antagonist with a personal stake in the Federation's downfall, and with the authority to act on it. Her presence signals that something fundamental changed, that the Romulans, once content to operate from the shadows, are now willing to step into the light, and that the Federation, whether it realizes it or not, is responding to events born from a timeline that shouldn't exist. The Federation doesn't know what happened. No one but Guinan ever suspects that history has been rewritten. And yet, the consequences are real. Officers die, wars nearly break out. The course of galactic diplomacy is altered. And at the center of it all is a woman who, by all rights, should never have been born. This is the true impact of the Sela effect. Star Trek still calls this timeline the Prime Timeline, but the presence of Sela, and the events she sets into motion, suggest otherwise. It might be prime in name, but it's not untouched. It's a continuity rewritten under the guise of restoration. And the longer you follow Sela's influence through history, the clearer it becomes. The Federation may have saved its future in yesterday's Enterprise, but it did so by letting a piece of another reality bleed through. When the timeline is restored at the end of yesterday's Enterprise, the crew of the Enterprise D returns to a world of peace. The war is gone. The sacrifice is forgotten. Tasha Yar is dead again. History resumes, untouched, untroubled. That is, for everyone except for one person, Guinan. Her memory doesn't follow linear paths. She doesn't recall specific events like a log entry, but she does feel time. And she knows, deeply, immediately, and absolutely, that what just happened never should have happened. She looks at Tasha Yar with the quiet weight of someone who already knows how the story ends, and knows this isn't the chapter that was supposed to be here. She doesn't look at Yar as if she's recalling fond memories. She studies her. She watches her move. And with complete clarity, Guinan tells Picard she shouldn't be here. It's not a guess. It's a truth she can feel. This is not new for her. Guinan has always existed slightly outside of time. In Time's Arrow, she meets Picard in the 19th century, creating a paradox she never forgets. In Generations, she senses the nexus across dimensions, and somehow stays a part of it. And in yesterday's Enterprise, her awareness pierces through an entire alternate timeline. She doesn't know the mechanics, or at least doesn't give us the indication she does, but she always knows the truth. And the truth is this: the version of Tasha Yar she's looking at isn't the one who died on Vegra 2. That version was erased. This one survived in a war that never should have been. And her presence is a wound in the fabric of time. What makes Guinan's role more unsettling isn't just that she senses something wrong. It's that she lets it happen. She doesn't try to stop Tasha from going with the Enterprise C. She all but encourages it. Because she knows the only way to restore what's been lost is through sacrifice. I almost question if, on some level, she doesn't already know that Sela exists, and that the only way to continue in the timeline she remembers is to let Tasha go onto the Enterprise C. Because she doesn't ultimately forget. Even in the restored timeline, she remembers just enough. She asks Geordi about Yar. Not with confusion, but with emotional weight. And then, across the rest of TNG, she doesn't seem to regret the existence of Sela. Not when Sela appears. Not when the timeline warps back. Not even when Picard is staring into the face of Tasha Yar's daughter. It's not forgetfulness. It's restraint. Maybe she knows that revealing too much would tear things open again. Or maybe she's the only one wise enough to live with the burden that this timeline isn't what it claims to be. In most time travel stories, Star Trek presents two options. Either time is repaired, or the damage is contained. But Guinan doesn't fit either of those outcomes. She's the residue. She's what's left behind when time fails to fully reset. She's the silent proof that history has changed, and that some part of her will always remember what it used to be. She may not consciously know who Sela is, but she knows that someone like Sela is possible. And I question if that doesn't terrify her to a degree. Because if someone from an erased future can still exist, then maybe that future wasn't erased at all. The timeline was fixed. That's what Star Trek told us. The Enterprise C returned to the past. The war timeline collapsed. History snapped back into place. And everything was as it should be. Except it wasn't. Because Tasha Yar did survive in the alternate reality. And her daughter, Sela, now exists in the so-called restored timeline. She's not an echo, not a ghost. She's real. She commands warships. She nearly toppled the Klingon Empire. She almost invaded Vulcan. And that's the problem. You can't have a fixed timeline and a daughter born of its failure. So we have to ask, if something survived from a reality that was erased, was it ever truly erased? Or did we just rename the broken timeline and call it Prime? For decades, Star Trek fans have treated the Prime timeline as sacred. It's the original, the foundation, the untouchable canon. But in universe, that word has historically meant nothing. Historically, no character in Star Trek ever refers to their reality as Prime. To them, it's just history. So when the timeline fractures, like it does in yesterday's Enterprise, they don't debate branches or labels. They just try to survive. They try to restore what was lost. But what if that restoration is only partial? What if every major time travel event, from the Guardian of Forever, to the Nexus, to the Temporal Cold War, left behind something permanent? Something small, something broken. Maybe the timeline feels restored because it mostly looks the same. Same ships, same characters, same history books. But look closer, and cracks start to appear. Sela exists. Guinan remembers. Events change in ways no one notices, but the consequences ripple outward. And no one ever questioned it. Because the new version of history fits. It works. It holds. And that's what makes it dangerous. Because if history can be rewritten that easily, then Prime isn't a constant. It's a consensus. It's a version of the timeline that wins. Not the original, not the purest, just the one that survives. That's what makes Sela so important. She's not a plot twist. She's not a footnote. She's proof. Proof that the timeline didn't return to what it was. It became something else. Something new. A branch that still calls itself Prime. And maybe that's the quiet truth of Star Trek. The history isn't about what happened. It's about what we agree happened. And the further away you get from the fracture, the easier it is to forget the break was ever there.